sample size with some accuracy here. Looks like about 1/3, 2/3. So we'll come back and check on that in just a minute. But we're going to just talk about the overview. This is high level stuff. So if you're super, super like not into development stuff, this is the part that is interesting for you. So embedded apps are apps, as one might imagine, that are embedded. And this is one right now that we're pulling up. It's actually the Slido embedded app. It's running inside of Webex, and I'm going to answer, I'm not sure if you can see my window, but I'm going to answer, yes, I am a developer. And we'll continue to see the results there. Now, what's happening? We're inside of a Webex meeting, but we're interacting with an app. Okay, so at the very basic level, this is a web app. It's made up of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it's being given a little home to live inside of the meeting or space. We're looking at a meeting right now, and we're using an embedded app in that, but in a space where you would type a chat space, a messaging space, kind of like a channel, if you will, that can also have a tab, and that tab can be an embedded app. So we'll talk about the differences there and what you can do with that. But the basic idea is that when you're in a meeting, you look down at the bottom right-hand side of your meeting, and there's this new button there with these little icons, and it says apps. And I just accidentally clicked when I pointed there. So when you see that apps button, that lets you know the meeting or space, I'm sorry, you won't see the apps button in the space, but the meeting that you're in is a meeting in which you can use embedded apps. We'll talk about how you can make your own and how you can use existing embedded apps that are on the App Hub. So once you've selected the embedded app that you want to use, then you're going to navigate as the host to whatever view, whatever page that it is that you want to push out to all of the participants of your meeting, and you're going to click Open Together. For example, let's say that I have a gallery of birthday party photos and I'm the host. Well, I want to find the birthday party photos for our boss, Adam. So I go navigating through, I see photos from me, I see photos from Aaron, I see photos from Joe and from Carmen and from Danny, and then I get to Adam and I'm like, okay, this is the page that I want to share. Once I'm on that page as the host, I'm ready to click Open Together, and I click that button. That URL is pushed out to all of the participants. Remember, it's an HTML, CSS, JavaScript little web view there. So what they're being pushed is a URL. And that is something that we'll look at as we go through the journey. Now, the purpose of an embedded app is to collaborate. That means that all of us are looking at the same web view and we're experiencing the same experience. Let's overuse that word. Why don't we? The idea is not to screen share. We've had screen sharing for quite a while. When I screen share, I'm sharing my view of what I'm doing. But that's not collaboration. That's me sharing out to you and you consuming that content passively. When we're sharing an embedded app together, you could be drawing on a whiteboard and I'm seeing it. And I could go and erase a little bit of your drawing and draw something else. That's collaboration. That's when we're actually connecting with each other to engage in real time. So there are two different views. One is going to be the view of the host. Again, the host can navigate to the content that we want to share. The other view is the receiver, and the receiver is any participant that is participating in the meeting. Now, there are several places that we can adjust the experience that we have. I'm going to close this little window right here, and we'll come back to that one. So right now, let's talk about the admin experience. When you have an account with Webex, you can just have a single account and just be a user, but it's possible to have an organization and to have users under that organization. And so this will be referring to the administrator of such an org. When you're inside of your control hub as an administrator, you're able to see the list of apps that are available to your organization. As you add apps, as developers in your company or contractors that you hire, other people bring you an app that you want to include inside of your organization, you can have that list here and you can adjust the experience that your organization's members will have. So you can do things regarding the security. One of the things that we'll talk about is protected, no, personally identifiable information, or PII. This is things like your email address or phone number, stuff like that. And because it's Cisco that makes Webex, you can trust that we have thought through privacy, security, and all of the things that go with enterprise level software. So as an admin, you have the power to come in and really adjust the experience on the back end. Keep in mind, you don't only have to develop your own apps. There are also apps in the App Hub, and we'll take a look at that as well. The developer experience is what we're here to talk about today, and that is going to be a very straightforward process. So the first time that I gave this talk internally, I think I had like 45 minutes to cover all of this, and I flew through it in probably 20, 30 minutes because it's very simple. But we're going to go through all of the steps. So you can see, even though the code part is simple, there are some environmental considerations and factors to keep in mind as a developer. And when you have developed your app, you're going to want to be able to test it with your team. So we're going to talk a little bit about ways that we can present that to other people. Okay, so let's look at the basic workflow here. You want to build an app, cool. You log in at developer.webex.com, and we'll go through these steps. It's not going to be all slides, but I'll just talk through it right now for those that want to get a high-level overview. You go to developer.webex.com, you sign in with your account, your Webex account. When you sign in there, that gives you the ability to do development. You can make a bot, you can make an integration, a guest issuer, which is a special system that allows you to give licensed seats to anonymous users. This is very good for, let's say, healthcare. If you want to have a doctor who has an account, but they want to have a patient join the meeting, and they don't want the patient to have to sign up for an account or share any of their personal information. That's a way that you can create that. But today, the one that we're going to be looking at is the embedded app. And the process of creating the app is two parts. We're going to call this creating an app right now, but what we're really doing is configuring metadata to present the app that we will create. This metadata includes whether or not it can be used in meetings, which we're in now, or in messaging spaces. And you'll give the app a name, a description, a tagline, and this is very tiny on the slide, but it'll be very big on the screen when we do this. We'll actually go through and fill out this form and create an app. And there are only a few methods that you work with as a developer to create an embedded app. There are events that you can tap into. There's several of those. But when it actually comes to the methods that people use to make the functionality of the app, we have set share URL, which is that push when people click open together, it pushes out a single URL to all of the participants. And we have two other methods, well, three, but you pick one. Get user, and then you pick one of either get meeting or get space. If you're in a meeting, of course, you would get meeting. If you're in a space, you would get space. Calling one in the other context is not intended, so that's why I kind of say there's three. Set share URL, get user, get meeting, or get space. And that's about it. We do have a little bit more going on, like I said, with events. You can see, is private data available to determine whether or not in the context that your app is running is PII enabled. And the display context, so that you can see, is the embedded app docked in the meeting? Is it in a pop-out window? And we've got some additional contexts on the way as well. And we won't go over all of these right now because we'll see them in the code when we actually look at the code. And now it's time for our demo. I'm going to switch over to my browser, and let's do that same journey that we saw in the slides, but we'll actually take the steps. So if you're not a developer right now is the time that you might think, this might not be for me. But I would really encourage you to still follow along. I'll try to keep it at a level where it's still something that's fun to observe, and it's giving you exposure to the world that we as developers operate in. So it helps you to understand a little bit more how to collaborate and interact with developers on your team as well. This is the starting point for all things on the Webex developer platform, developer.webex.com. And there are three basic places that you're directed here: our documentation, our blog, and our support. Under the documentation, you've got an introduction to the general platform, but if you look down on the left side navigation here, you can see the section for embedded apps, and that's the one that we're interested in today. I'll click on the overview, and you can see there's a button right there where you can click an embedded app, create an embedded app. There's another place to look though. If you go to your icon as you're logged in and click to drop down, you can see My Webex Apps. And when you click on that, it goes to your actual list of apps under your account. I've got a few here that I've been using for demos, and it's okay to delete and create new ones because really what's happening is we're just filling out a form. I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. Create a new app, embedded app, create an app. And here we're at that form where I'm creating my app. I haven't written any code yet per se, but I can go ahead and configure parts of this right now. I'm going to say this should run in a meeting and a messaging space. The embedded app name is going to be Webinar Webex EA Dev Journey. Description. Oops. Look at that. No special characters. Cannot contain the name Cisco or Webex. It likes that. So you'll see several of those where you do have some authentication, or I'm sorry, validation running on the front end to make sure that it's guiding you towards the proper kind of information that we're looking for here. As a description, I'm going to say be excellent to each other. As a tagline, say, whoop, I'm going to pick color orange. Oh, it wants at least 10 characters. So let's be sneaky. Whoop, whoop, whoop. We'll do this default icon. You could upload your own, and here's the specs, JPEG or PNG, 512 by 512. This is an interesting thing here. And this is where we're actually going to pause. We're going to go do a couple other things, and then we're going to come back and keep filling this out. Valid domains are basically a whitelist of things that can run with your app. And what we are most interested in right now is the start page URL. Remember that an embedded app is a web app, which means it needs to be running on a web server. It needs to have an SSL certificate. It needs to be available to the public, not behind your VPN. It needs to be accessible, and that is where we say, okay, this URL goes as the start of the embedded app that we're creating. So what I'd like to do is go over and look at some code that we have been playing with here. This is a service called Glitch. It's a free service. There is a paid plan, but we're not associated with them. It's just a tool that I like. And what I like about it is that it lets me run my code, not only front-end code like you might see on another service like CodePen or something like that, but it also does back-end code. So that's kind of cool. And it hosts in a way that I'm able to actually use the URL that it gives me, where I do this preview in a new window. This URL right here, webexembedded-app.glitch.me, that is a live hosted place that I can actually share with the world, so it's valid for me to enter as I'm filling out my embedded app. So I've grabbed that URL, and we're going to come back and look at the code in just a minute, but I want to show this process first. So I've grabbed my URL, I'm going to paste it in here, and it's going to complain because I didn't actually whitelist this domain yet. I've got to come up here and add this valid domain, glitch.me, and boom, it's happy. Now, you can have separate start page URLs for your meetings versus your messaging spaces, but that's not something that we're going to demonstrate today. We're just going to keep it all the same. When I click Add Embedded App, I have an embedded app. I'm not so sure that I can stop Slido and start sharing that app, but we'll give it a shot at the end of the presentation and see if it's possible because I just created it and I don't know if it's going to be loaded up into the system during the meeting or not. But what we've done is create this in my account, and I've got a couple of options here. Do you remember we were looking at that admin panel for the org? Now, this is a place where internally for my org, I could request my administrator's approval by clicking this button. And this means I'm asking them to take it out of the development world that we're in right now for just testing and say, within our organization, I'd like all of my coworkers and all of our clients and customers and people that are partners and everyone in our org, let them use that app. But then there's the whole world, and the whole world has access to the Webex App Hub. And that is something that will be like launching like you would on a mobile platform or a desktop platform. This App Hub is for the WebEx platform. A lot of cool things go along with that too. If you're in marketing or sales, you get a lot of exposure. You're in an App Hub, you've got a page, you've got people surfing through there doing searches. If your product shows up, there you go. And we even have partners that we work closely with. One of the tasks that we've been given as embedded apps were being created was before embedded apps were released, we worked hands-on very closely with partners to make sure that they had all of the resources necessary for success. And that included things like coordinated go-to-market launch. So there's a lot of ecosystem around this. It's not just functionality. Okay, so we're pretty happy with the fact that we've got this app. Let's check it out. In my list of apps, my WebEx apps, here we have Webinar, EA, Embedded Apps, Dev Journey, and that's the one that we just created. I can come back in and make an edit. Let's edit the color of the icon. Let's change that to green. And there we go. We're all set. I can go back to my list of apps, and now it's a green icon. Okay, so let's go back to the code. This is the important part. As a developer, how do I make this appear on the screen and what's it doing? Well, a few things are happening here. This is the publicly hosted instance of the code that we're going to look at. Because it's publicly hosted, it's not inside of a meeting. Don't get confused here. We're in a meeting right now, and we're using an embedded app called Slido, but I'm screen sharing, and in my screen share, you're looking at the UI of the publicly hosted instance of the code that we're going to use for this app. That means that when I click buttons like get user, it's going to return values like null, 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 because it's not in the context where it can actually use the framework to get those values. Same thing goes for get meeting and get space. However, there are a few things that do work, and this is interesting. When I click get attributes, oh, interesting, it's not working now. So a little change, but it used to actually pop up with a couple of things here. Okay, we've also got set share URL, and in that, basically, we've got this URL of the glitch.me publicly hosted participant HTML page, and I'm going to copy and do a new tab and paste that URL so that we can view what will the participants see. And this is the participants page. It says participant page on top so that we know that that's what it is. And it doesn't log the same things in the same way there. But what we want to do is set share URL. And the message is to us as developers, just looking at our log, shared the following URL with the participant. And it's going to be that URL right there. So we could even go back and edit the embedded app to be more specific. Let's refresh and come down here. And let's say for our in-meeting start page URL, let's say that I want to do that one. And so you can kind of see how it can be a little bit different experience depending on the context. Okay, so we're looking at it outside of the context, but the expectation is that once we have moved it into the meeting or space as a user or a host pulls it up, it wakes up, it's running the embedded apps framework. So that has hooks to its environment and it can say, hey, what's my current user? Hey, what's my current meeting ID? So we'll take a look at how some of that operates in the code. Okay, here's the JavaScript file, but let's back up. Here's the index. Again, an embedded app is HTML, JavaScript, and if you feel like it, some CSS. That's all that's necessary to create an app. And here's the basics. It should be an HTML5 document, and you should have an import of the script here. And the script is hosted on webex.com, and it's a JavaScript file called webex-embedded-app-app. I'm sorry, embedded-app-SDK. This is where you're pulling in the functionality that provides you with the methods that we're going to be using. It provides you with the event listeners, and it provides you with these hooks that give you actual data back from the environment that you're operating in. Of course, the interface here is what we were looking at just a moment ago. We have an H1, a paragraph, we've got some buttons, we've got a table, which is intended to display the result of getting back the information that we're calling for. We've got the form field where you could put any URL in there and do set share URL, which makes this kind of a test harness. In fact, we've got this framework test harness up here. You could theoretically have this be the page that loads for your host. The host could paste in there webex.com and set share URL, and then that's the URL that will be pushed to everybody, not even the one that's hosted at glitch.me. If you set share URL to anything, that's the URL that everybody starts at. Whoops, the top of my screen just occluded the tab. There we are. Okay, so the part that we're really interested in is the JavaScript, and we've got our own little JavaScript file here, index.js. So we'll go take a look real quick. There's not a lot of CSS going on. We're just trying to make it come away from the edge of the screen for our sanity as we do the demo. But here's the magic. Up top, we've got a little bit of documentation here, but this is outdated. I used it for a hackathon and one or two other presentations. But I'll show you the official GitHub repository with our sample code that you can use as your starting point. I used that sample code. I pasted it over here. I modified it just a little bit to play with it. And the result is what we're going to look at. Okay, so we've got console.log. This is very familiar. Everybody knows console.log. In the process of development, as you run your app and you're testing it, you're going to want to be able to right click and inspect and look at the console. And this is where you'll see console.log. But that's kind of a slow process. It's one more step. So what we've done here is to create this little section on the page to manipulate the DOM and have an event log that just appears in your view, in your UI. And when I click something like get user or get meeting, it's not even doing it now, but you saw it a second ago. Oh, over here. So when I was clicking on these things, basically what's happening is it's just manipulating the DOM. It's adding li list items to a UL, an unordered list. And every time I click that, it appends, or well, actually I had it prepend. So it's going to be LIFO, last in, first out. And I think that's how that should be described. Basically the newest on top. So that way you don't have to like right click and inspect and then go find your console and see the console logs. But when you do see, let's get started. And that is something, I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcut. I've got this little panel at the very top of my screen that says you're sharing your screen, and it's right where I wanted to click the tab. Um, then I'm logging, okay, so let's get started. And then I'm logging the Windows location just out of curiosity. But the important part here is that we're setting a variable called app to be a new instance of the object returned by window.webex.application. So that's going to be the core that we work with, the framework there. And the important thing that we need to wait for before we do anything is the onReady event. So onReady is a promise. It's going to give back um, what what we need to see to say, okay, this is loaded, it's aware of its surroundings, it's ready to operate, and then we're just doing a log. And you'll notice the difference here where it says console.log, that's JavaScript. Where it says log, that's tricky. What we've done here is this function, and that's how we're adding to the DOM with these list items. We're saying that we want to have the UL be document get element by ID, and then I named it console down there. And then a list item is going to create an element called the list item. And then the payload is going to create a text node, and it's going to stringify the JSON that we're getting back from these calls. We're appending child, and then we're prepending to the UL itself. So that's what's happening. Anytime you see the log function, we are logging, but it's kind of weird just for this particular code example. You don't have to do this. It's just a way to view things as we work. So let's look at what happens after we're ready, after we've logged that, after we've logged that we are on ready and we've seen the definition of the log function here. The next one that we come across is just a wrapper that I made, that they made for the kitchen sink and that I'm using called handle get user. And the important part inside of that is the actual function call itself, and that is app.context.getUser. Now, what is my goal here? Let's step back and take a little code break. My goal when I'm getting the user's information is to be able to provide a smoother experience. Keep in mind that there might not be user information available. We talked earlier about how PII can be disabled. When that's disabled, get user is giving you back blanks. You're not getting back their information. Primarily, email is the thing that might be useful here. So let's say that our app is, let's come up with an example use case. Let's say that our app is a poker game. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I should see my cards, but no one else should see my cards. So it's a unique experience. This is not a time to screen share. And maybe it'd be cool to see the names of the other people around the table in the room. And if get user is called and everybody's got their PII turned on, then we can get that information. And you could see like my name next to a virtual character seated at the table or something like that. So this is an opportunity for you to make the experience better. But keep in mind, you have to accommodate users that have that turned off. As you're submitting your app to the App Hub, our team will be testing, not ours specifically, but the team that does that will be testing whether or not your app works in both PII and no PII contexts, because that's important. When we do have PII turned on and we can get user information, here's some of the kinds of information that we can get. We can get the user ID, we can get the org ID, we can get their email, we can get their display name, and we can get a token. Now, this is something that sounds very tempting. I get a token, cool. So maybe I can use that token to make API calls. Not the case. That is not what this token is for. This is a JWT token that is used to validate that the connection between your app and the Webex servers is a valid connection. That's it right now. There is no way to connect to the API from an embedded app. The only thing an embedded app does, we talked about this, it gets the meeting or space, it gets the user if PII is enabled, and it sets the share URL. That's about it. We will talk a little at the end about how you could work around that and make what we call a hybrid solution, where the embedded app, which does not access the Webex APIs, can be the UI that displays the result of another app that you build called an integration that can access the APIs. So this hybrid solution of two apps working together can get access to the API, but this token is not something you'll use in that process. If you're doing that process, you're going to need to take the user, the participant, through the OAuth implicit grant flow to authorize, where they give permission and say, yes, I will allow this code to operate on behalf of my Webex account. In that context, then you're able to make API calls to do things such as schedule a meeting for that user. So that could be a cool scheduling tool where all of us are looking at a shared calendar and you're able to say like, hey, this user wants to join this meeting, and we check, 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 and then try to schedule. The embedded app can't do that. It can be the check, check, check interface that we're looking at, but then the functionality needs to tap into the back end and go through an integration to hit the APIs. Okay, here's handle get meeting. Again, the important part here is handle get meeting, and you can see how very thin this wrapper is. All it does is add the fact that we're just logging to the console because it is a test harness, and as developers, it's nice for our code to be noisy during development so we can hear, what is the engine doing here? Are there any hiccups? Same thing for handle get space. Again, your app is going to either run in a meeting or a space. So one or the other is going to be there. And then here's handle set share. Again, the important part here is that we are calling set share URL. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the events. So when we're listening, there are several things that can change. The theme can change, which means that the user has changed their Webex client from a dark mode to a light mode or back, and you can handle that. So when you listen for that event, the event fires, you can say, uh-oh, we're over here now in dark mode, so we should change which CSS we're using to display our app to the user. And that way, their entire experience feels nice. They don't have a nice dark mode WebEx meeting and then a flashlight in their face. They've got a unified view there. The share state can change, info can change, role can change. And that is true for a meeting and a space. So keep in mind, if you see role changed twice, or I'm sorry, info changed twice there, it's because one is for meeting and one is for space. And that's really all of the functionality that we're going to be looking at. There are a few more things that we can get. You can clear share the URL that you've shared. We could talk a little bit about that. Basically, if you can set it, you can clear it. The impact is on the experience. And then there are some attributes. This is just a wrapper that's looking at some of the attributes that we can look at. Device type, display context, which is docked or floating or others. The theme that's being used, this would be dark or light. And so what we've done here is just to add to the little box in this table here, the inner HTML for each of these different cells in that table, with comments regarding the type that could be inserted. For example, language would be in the standard format with the language and country codes there. And then the SDK version and about the WebEx app. So a little bit of detail that you can tap into, but the focus is on you, your app, what it is that you're doing for people to collaborate. Again, it's a very simple experience. We're in a meeting and boop, here's a web page. But the nature of that web page is what's magical. If you're working with WebRTC and WebSockets, and you've got, each of the people on the page communicating where their cursor is in real time, you can see each other's mouses moving around on the screen. it allows you to create some very, very powerful experiences. And we've seen that with our partners that we've worked with. There are amazing apps in the App Hub, and I would like to go take a look at that real quick. Want to just scroll and make sure I've covered everything in the code here. And if you have any questions about the code, I would love to geek out with you and get down into it and chat about that. You can ask questions in this meeting in the Slido or inside of the Q&A panel. Or you can ping me, and we are on Twitter at Webex Devs. And that is a place that you can reach out to us, send us a message, tweet at us, reply in a thread, and it can be a public conversation. I mean, maybe you've got a question, maybe others will benefit from us talking about it out loud. If only there were a place designed for that kind of interaction. Let's go look at something. cs.co/Webex developer community. This is a really good place for that kind of interaction too. So if you'd like to, post your question here. It doesn't have to be live QA right now. If you're watching this recording and you like, oh, I had a question, ask it here. You can ask a question with a big button on the right, and you can log in with your Webex account, and you can earn swag on there. You can look at events that are coming up. It's really a powerful community center for you to interact with us. But the place I wanted to show you here is the partners that we've been working with. This is the App Hub. It's apphub.webex.com. And on the left side, you've got all these categories and everything, but scroll down until you get to app type and you see embedded apps there. And when I click that, look at all of these. These are some really cool products. So if you'd like some inspiration, you want to see what it is that people are doing with embedded apps, I would really strongly suggest maybe check out Miro, one of our partners here, and look at their whiteboard. You can have a whiteboard up and you're drawing on the screen and your coworkers are also drawing on the screen. It's a really cool way to collaborate. And you don't have to switch contexts to do it. You don't have to flip between your browser and your meeting and try to shuffle all that around. It's all nice and packaged up in one space there. So with that, I'm going to do a little tour of my tabs and see if there was anything that I left behind. We looked at the list of apps that developers can develop. We looked at how, as a developer, I can request that my org has access to use the app after I've tested it and I want everyone in my org to use it. We've seen how to submit to the App Hub so that the whole world can use it. And we've looked at the documentation. There's a lot of really good information in here, so be sure to check this out, including design guidelines. So if you're a UX designer, we've got you. Like everything that you could possibly do with your embedded apps, there should be coverage. And if there's not, please tell us and we'll make sure that there is. We've looked at the code and we've looked at the console. Here we can see a lot of these methods that were being called. And we have looked at how you create a new app. And we've looked at the community forum. And we've looked at the end game, which is that your app can be out here in the App Hub where people can find it and use it. In fact, let's do a search here, Slido, embedded app by Slido. And once you get here, you can see a little bit about it and use it in your meetings. So that's embedded apps. I do hope to see you on the forums and on Twitter. And I would love to hear your feedback on any questions that you still have with embedded apps. I'm going to take a look now at apps, and I'm going to try to run the app that we created today together. Tech Talk example for developers, test app 1. Okay, so as I suspected, it didn't actually show up in the meeting, but the exact same app is basically right here from a previous one that I created. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to share WebEx. It says you're sharing WebEx. And I probably need to unminimize. Hang on, share my meeting window. Yay. Okay, so I'm going to go back to apps. This is the experience when I'm in a meeting. I click apps down here on the bottom right. It brings up my list of apps. I do have this older one that I had before, so I'm clicking test app, and here's the offer. It's not approved by the org, so you might not have the full experience. Remember, I have to have the org admin approve it, but as a developer, you can see my experience. I'm going to say open and share my personal information. That's with PII on. This one would be with PII off, but I'll do it on. And I'll click open. And there we go. This is docked inside of my meeting. I can adjust it and it will wrap around and I can pop it out into its own window or pop it back in. And there's no button down at the bottom, but once I click set share URL, which is the same as if my code had done it, boom, now it's ready. And I can click open together and it says close the current session and start a new one. There can be only one. Okay, Highlander. Yes. Now, this has pushed out to everybody. Again, I'm not super sure. I'm not me. So please tell me, someone from our team, did that show up on your end? All right.
Yes.
Very cool. Now, I'm curious. Please click Get User, and I'm just gonna see. Okay, so there's that user token. I'm not gonna give you the whole thing, but it is getting my user information. That's that JWT token that's not used to authorize the account. It's simply a contract between your app and the Webex system. When I click Get Attributes, this is working. It says the meeting is in a sidebar over there. It says it's a desktop client. It says that my app thing is dark because that is the way. And my language is English, and the app version is the SDK version is 1.2.0, and I am in the Webex Meetings client version 42.3.4.7. It's kind of cool to see those things.
Hey, David, for some reason, the participants view, the buttons, at least on mine, are not functioning. But it's
Interesting.
good to see it working on your
Yeah.
view.
Yeah, good to see it working here. And it's possible that because the app has not been approved by the admin org and we're in a public context with meeting users outside of Cisco and I'm on a Cisco account, it could be any number of things. So we'll test a little before our next presentation, see what is the best way to present this in utero app to the world. Because the idea is that it's not ready to present to the world yet. And we haven't taken those steps of approving with the org admin or putting it in the app hub. So I will follow up on that. But I'm going to click this button, Stop Session, and say, yes, we have stopped the session. Back to apps. So I'm going to close this out and I'm going to stop sharing. And do we have any more Slido stuff that we want? Or Adam, would you be able to open up Slido again as an embedded app? And or I'm trying myself now as well.
I believe Carmen needs to as the host of the webinar.
Carmen. Oh, I think she moved it to being me the host, so let me check.
Okay.
Slido.
Yep, I'm seeing it now.
Oh, I didn't even click open together, but you're seeing it now?
Yeah.
I see
Okay.
it.
Yeah, Slido is a special use case where since it's a Cisco product, we don't have that open together flow.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Okay, so I'm looking at the Q&A now, and let's go into the Q&A phase. Anyone on my team, did I promise to cover something and then forget to do it, or did we land the plane here?
I think we're good.
Yeah, okay. Okay, let's do Q&A. Can you post, yes, the link, the GitHub link of your example code. Okay, I'm going to screen share again and actually show you where to go find that example code. Share, screen, share. And we're going to go to developer.webex.com, documentation, embedded apps, overview, and developer quick start is going to, I always go straight there, so I'm trying to figure out where our example code is. Developer guide. I'm gonna do search GitHub, the Webex kitchen sink. Okay, so developer.webex.com, embedded apps, developer guide, the Webex kitchen sink app on GitHub. And here we go. When we go to index.js, it's slightly different code than what we looked at from my little test project, but it's the same stuff happening, right down to that unique kind of on-screen DOM manipulation to log in the UI. This is an organization that the WebEx developer evangelism team operates. We've got a lot of things here. The one that we just looked at is the embedded app sample. So if you're starting on the homepage there, embedded app sample is what we call the kitchen sink. And that is HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and then 2 pages, participant HTML with its JS and the regular index with its JS. So if you're trying to test 2 different experiences, you can, or you can just use the index. And what you would do is basically copy and paste all of this to whatever place you want to host it. Glitch is nice. There's many more. You can then save your code there, run it, paste the URL as your embedded app start URL, and you're up and running. You got a test project going.